She agreed to sell one night of her own dignity to save her mother, but she never imagined that the encounter with a paraplegic millionaire, marked by silence and mystery, would change her destiny forever. What seemed like a mere sacrifice would turn into a web of betrayals, family conspiracies, and breathtaking discoveries, until it revealed that love can blossom in the most unlikely places. In Abuja, the sunset reflected off the glass of towering buildings, but Ngozi's life remained confined within a small makeshift beauty salon in a working-class neighborhood. The smell of chemicals mingled with the sweat of clients, and the old fans barely managed to combat the stifling heat. Still, every braid, every hairstyle was crafted with dedication, as it provided the income that helped keep her mother at home. It was amid the noise of hairdryers that the call came. The doctor warned that her mother's heart was on the verge of failure, and surgery was needed immediately. Ngozi's hands trembled so much that the scissors nearly fell to the floor. That news wasn't just a medical update, it was a sentence crushing her against the wall. That night, the simple room she shared with her mother felt even smaller. The muffled groans from the bed beside her echoed as the elderly woman tried to hide her pain. Ngozi adjusted the blankets, pretending to be strong, but inside, guilt devoured her. Each faint heartbeat of her mother was a cruel reminder that time was running out. The surgery cost millions of naira, an unreachable sum for someone who could barely afford the rent for a cramped room. It was in that heavy silence that the indecent proposal arrived, whispered by an acquaintance who seemed to know too much. One night, just one night, with a paraplegic millionaire in exchange for the exact amount needed for the operation. Ngozi's heart raced, not only at the absurdity of the suggestion, but at how the idea seemed laden with invisible traps. She knew stories of women who took easy paths and ended up bound by invisible chains of blackmail. Yet the word surgery echoed in her mind like a war drum. Her mother's frail face came to memory, the etched wrinkles, the eyes still bright despite the pain, the stubborn smile that always said, "Hold on, my daughter." How could she refuse the only chance to save her, even if it cost her own dignity? For days, Ngozi wrestled with her conscience. Walking through the bustling streets of Wus, she saw bank advertisements, luxury, cars and expensive watches in shop windows, as if the city screamed that wealth existed for some and never for her. Every honk, every random market conversation seemed to mock her powerlessness. In a moment of desperation, she visited a community pastor who prayed for her mother and said, "God opens paths even in the darkness." But when she returned home, she found her mother weaker, unable to climb the 3 steps to the entrance without help. The time for waiting for miracles seemed to have run out. The proposal resurfaced when the acquaintance appeared again, insisting, "It's just one night. He's rich, needs company, and no one needs to know." The idea felt too cruel, yet strangely calculated, as if it were fated. Ngozi didn't sleep that night, sitting by the bed, watching her mother's fragile breathing. Tears fell silently, soaking the pillow. In that moment, she wasn't thinking of herself or the shame that would consume her. She thought only of hearing, in the future, the sound of her mother's heart beating strongly again. The next day, she accepted the deal. The words left her mouth like stones, dry and irreversible. "I'll do it." She felt her soul shatter, as if she had signed a pact with her own pain. The acquaintance smiled, satisfied, and said she'd arrange everything, the car, the meeting, the secrecy. Ngozi only nodded, but inside she was screaming. She knew she was about to cross a threshold she could never close again. Her family's fate now depended on a sacrifice that challenged everything she believed in. Her mother's heart would be saved, but at what cost? Ngozi's gaze reflected fear, anger, and resignation. Little did she know that night would not only secure her mother's health, but also drag her into a web of secrets, conspiracies, and emotions that would change her life forever. Here at African Village Story, every tale is a dive into raw emotions and impossible choices. If Ngozi's decision already gave you chills, imagine what's coming. Next, subscribe now, hit the bell, and live every twist with us. The city of Abuja hid many secrets behind high walls and armored gates. Among those secrets, one of the most talked about was the name Ifeanyi Daramola, a real estate tycoon, owner of developments that reshaped the urban landscape of Maitama and Wus. He carried an aura of mystery that piqued public curiosity. Journalists tried to photograph him at events, but rarely succeeded. Business associates described him as brilliant yet inaccessible, someone who preferred to negotiate through lawyers and aides. This isolation fueled even more speculation about his personal life. The wheelchair was a symbol of both strength and vulnerability. The accident that left him paraplegic was never fully explained. Some said it was a car crash on the Kaduna road. Others whispered it might have been sabotage within his own company. The fact was, since that day, the tycoon withdrew from the spotlight and lived under an almost military regime of privacy. His Maitama mansion became a fortress, stone-clad walls, automated gates, cameras at every corner. For many, crossing those gates was like entering a parallel world. The dinner began with a piercing silence that filled the main hall. Imported marble, crystal chandeliers, and priceless paintings contrasted with the cold atmosphere. Ifeanyi waited in the dining room, impeccably dressed. White dress shirt, navy blazer, a Swiss watch reflecting the candlelight. His imposing presence, even seated, conveyed authority and distance. Ngozi, escorted to the table by a staff member, felt the weight of the environment suffocate every step. The clinking of cutlery sounded like thunder in the vast space. As the dishes were served, words barely came. Ifeanyi limited himself to observing her, his eyes hiding more than they revealed. The silence wasn't just shyness or disdain, but the mark of someone accustomed to measuring every gesture. It was as if he were trying to read every feature of Ngozi before allowing any closeness. She, in turn, avoided his gaze, focusing on the expensive food that seemed tasteless. Each second at that table carried the weight of an invisible negotiation. Curiously, despite the discomfort, there were details that betrayed another side of the tycoon. The perfectly aligned cutlery, the soft classical music in the background, the subtle scent of fresh flowers scattered around the room, all suggested that Ifeanyi wasn't an indifferent man, but someone who controlled every detail to hide his own fragility. Behind the silence, there might have been a fear of being truly seen, and it was precisely this contradiction, strength and vulnerability in the same body, that made the atmosphere electric. Ngozi, in silence, thought about what that night meant. It wasn't just a transaction, but a collision of two opposing worlds. The simplicity of someone living on the edge of need, and the opulence of someone who could buy almost anything, except emotional freedom. Her downcast eyes noticed that something in this story hadn't yet been told. That dinner wouldn't just be another night of empty luxury, it would be the start of something neither had foreseen. Imagine yourself sitting at that table, facing a man as powerful as he is enigmatic, unsure of what he's truly hiding. What would be the first thing you'd say to Ifeanyi in that silence? Write in the comments. The set table felt more like a silent battlefield than an intimate dinner. Porcelain plates aligned, crystal glasses reflecting the chandelier's warm light, but no words filled the space. Ifeanyi kept his gestures restrained, cutting his meat slowly, as if each movement were calculated to reveal nothing beyond necessity. Ngozi stole glances and sensed that this man carried something greater than his wheelchair suggested. There was a hidden pain, an invisible weight that kept him from drawing closer. The respect with which he treated her was confusing. There was no improper touch, no invasive look, but also no room for closeness. It was as if deep down he knew she wasn't there by desire, but by necessity. That respectful distance, paradoxically, made her even more uneasy. Ngozi wondered if that silence was worse than any harsh words. After all, how could she endure a night where even the air seemed to refuse to move? As the food remained untouched on her plate, memories of her mother's small room surfaced like painful flashes. The elderly woman's frail body, her tearful eyes pleading for just a few more days of life. Ngozi clung to that image, like someone grasping the last rope before a fall. She repeated to herself that she was saving the only family she had, even if it cost sleepless nights and a guilt hard to erase. That mantra was her only remedy against the shame threatening to consume her. The Swiss watch on Ifeanyi's wrist ticked time cruelly. Each extended minute felt like an eternity in that dining room. Between sips of wine, Ngozi's mind wandered. How many women in that city would accept something similar? How many had already sold nights for favors, contracts, or status? The difference was that for her, there was no luxury at the end of the line, only the hope of hearing her mother's heart beat strongly again. This contrast made her reflect on how Abuja hid inequalities at every corner. The silence was finally broken, not by words but by a simple gesture. Ifeanyi pushed his plate aside, looked at her intently, and let out a heavy sigh as if acknowledging his own loneliness. He said nothing, but in that moment something shifted. They weren't just two strangers at a table. They were two people trapped in different but equally painful battles. The respect, though cold, opened a small crack that made the air less suffocating. Ngozi, however, couldn't relax. The knot in her throat remained. Her body was present, but her mind screamed for answers. How far would this night go? And worse, what weight would she carry? Afterward, Ifeanyi's silence hid secrets but also offered enigmas, and somehow she knew this encounter wouldn't end at dawn. If you were Ngozi, would you take this silence as respect or see it as mere distance? Share your view. Whose side would you be on at that table? The cold hospital corridor carried a silence heavier than the one in the Maitama mansion. Ngozi waited for the test results with clammy hands, her mind spinning in circles. When the nurse appeared with a folded paper, a quick glance confirmed what her body had already whispered through subtle signs. She was pregnant. The floor seemed to vanish beneath her feet. There was no joy, no celebration, only a muted panic. Would she be seen as a gold digger, reduced to just another opportunistic woman in the city's cruel narrative? That thought gnawed at her more than the news itself. Back in her room, her breathing struggled to steady. She imagined the neighbors' whispers, the judgment in strangers' eyes, the veiled accusations even in her clients' glances at the salon. Abuja was always a city where luxury and poverty shared the same sidewalk, and every rags-to-riches story was met with suspicion. Now she carried a secret that could save a life and at the same time destroy her reputation. The pregnancy wasn't just a biological fact, it was a minefield of social and moral dilemmas. While Ngozi drowned in torment on the other side of the city, the walls of Daramola Holdings began to tremble. Obiora, Ifeanyi's cousin and business partner, whispered in the company's corridors that the tycoon was no longer fit to lead. In informal meetings, he suggested the wheelchair symbolized weakness and that investors deserved someone more capable. Each rumor spread like poison in crystal glasses, slowly eroding shareholders' trust. The power of a well-told lie, especially in corporate circles, was greater than many market blows. For Ifeanyi, this internal attack was more painful than any architectural barrier. The wheelchair didn't stop him from thinking or negotiating, but Obiora's words hinted at something deeper: moral incapacity, fragility in business. It was a silent war that left no visible scars, but wounded the soul of someone already carrying them. And worse, it came from family, the place where one should find protection. This veiled betrayal turned every meeting into an invisible battlefield. Meanwhile, Ngozi rehearsed phrases in front of the mirror that she might never manage to say. How could she explain to such a distant man that she carried an unexpected life? How could she tell someone so used to suspecting everyone that there was something pure, even in the most painful circumstances? Her mind repeated answers that sounded false, rehearsed justifications that felt like excuses, and each attempt grew her fear, as if her own voice refused to come out. Fate seemed to play cruel parallels. On one side, a pregnant young woman afraid of being condemned by the world. On the other, a tycoon cornered by internal conspiracies. Two different but equally suffocating battles about to collide inevitably. And when those worlds met again, nothing would ever be the same. If you were Ngozi, would you have the courage to reveal this pregnancy to a distrustful man surrounded by enemies? Write in the comments, would you tell the truth or keep the secret? Ngozi took a deep breath before crossing the gate of the Maitama mansion. Each step echoed as if the ground were hollow stone. In her heart, fear pulsed louder than courage. She was about to reveal something that could change everything, and the only certainty was that Ifeanyi's silence would be harder to face than any harsh words. Entering the office, she found him amid a pile of reports, his serious face lit only by the amber glow of a lamp. It was a scene of judgment, and she knew there was no turning back. The words came out like stones, though spoken softly. "I'm expecting a child." Time seemed to freeze. Ifeanyi didn't move, didn't blink, just let the silence fill the space like a verdict. His stillness wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Within him, wounds reopened by Obiora's schemes made him see conspiracies everywhere. His heart no longer distinguished truth from lies. For someone surrounded by invisible enemies, this news wasn't a miracle, it was a trap. Ngozi tried to hold his gaze, but the lack of reaction burned more than any accusation. Ifeanyi's silence wasn't respect, It was distrust. How could he believe that a simple young woman, who had agreed to be there out of necessity, now carried a life without wanting something in return? His logic, shaped by pain, distorted her purity. The weight of his past fell upon a present that could have been hope, and each second without a response was like a door closing in front of her. Bitterly, Ifeanyi finally spoke. It wasn't a shout, but a veiled accusation. "How many zeros do you expect me to believe this story is worth?" The words cut Ngozi like a blade. She didn't try to defend herself, as any word would sound like bargaining. She let the silence answer for her, with tears held back in her eyes. There was no room for explanations in a heart ruled by paranoia. That was the cruelest wound of the night, not being believed when she spoke the truth. Feeling rejected, Ngozi decided to disappear. She left the mansion like someone fleeing an invisible fire. The light rain falling over Abuja seemed to baptize her departure. She walked through dark streets with no clear destination, only the certainty that she couldn't return. The money she'd received was still tucked away, but now it felt like a curse in the form of banknotes. It was as if each bill carried the weight of his distrust. The idea of starting over alone and pregnant was terrifying, but it seemed less painful than begging for trust where there was none. In Ifeanyi's mind, however, the night didn't end with the door closing. Her absence made the air heavier than her uncomfortable presence. The wheelchair became an even crueler prison when the echo of his own words returned like a hammer. What if he had just pushed away the only person who dared tell him something true? But the bitterness, fed by years of betrayal, spoke louder. Doubt consumed him, leaving no room for hope. The accident that transformed Ifeanyi's life had always been shrouded in shadows. For years, he accepted the official version: mechanical failure at high speed, a common tragedy on Nigerian roads. But documents found by chance in a forgotten company safe revealed something darker. Among fake invoices and deleted emails, there were records of unperformed maintenance and direct orders from third parties to tamper with the car's parts. For the first time, the puzzle pieces began to fit, and the old wound reopened with devastating force. Obiora's name appeared in the subtext like a ghost. Money transfers, discreet meetings in Abuja hotels, coded messages to suppliers. Each detail pointed to a calculated plan. It wasn't fate or bad luck, but a deliberate attempt to eliminate a rival. His blood boiled as he realized his wheelchair was the fruit of family betrayal. The memory of his cousin's smiling face at business meetings now seemed like a serpent's mask. And this shock brought something more dangerous than pain: the desire for justice. The signs had always been there in the corridors of Daramola Holdings. Exchanged glances among employees, decisions that seemed to benefit only one side, projects stalled for no apparent reason. Many shareholders chose to ignore them, out of convenience or fear. But the revelation made it clear that Ifeanyi's fall was no mere accident. It was part of a strategy to weaken him into surrender. This realization changed everything. If he had lived as a survivor before, now a silent fighter was born within him. Revisiting the papers, he realized exposing his cousin without irrefutable proof wasn't enough. Abuja was a city where rumors held as much weight as official documents, and the powerful could turn lies into accepted truths. He needed allies, voices that couldn't be easily silenced. More than revenge, he needed to build a network to uphold the truth against those who profited from lies. The accident was no longer just a personal tragedy. It was a symbol of a rotten system. His mind returned to the moment he heard Ngozi's last words. The memory of his distrust now weighed differently. Had he pushed away the one ally he might have had? As he reflected, the mansion's loneliness felt crueler than ever. Money, high walls, and armed guards weren't enough. What lay ahead would demand more than wealth. It would require trust, courage, and the willingness to join forces with someone who also carried invisible wounds. The revealed past didn't just reignite his anger, it reignited the urgency to act. If the accident had been a weapon, it was time to turn his pain into a shield. Ifeanyi could no longer hide behind silence. The war now had a name, a face, and was closer than he imagined. If you discovered the accident that changed your life was planned by your own blood, would you seek justice or revenge? Share in the comments. Ngozi was walking down a narrow street in Garki when she noticed repeated footsteps behind her. It wasn't a coincidence. The same men had appeared days earlier, watching from afar. pretending to browse newspaper stands or linger at corners. That morning, they decided to act. A black car slowed beside her, and two strangers quickly got out. Before she could think, she was pushed against a wall, and a thick envelope fell at her feet. Inside were documents already filled out with her name, accusing Ifeanyi of abandoning paternity. A single signature would turn gossip into a scandalous headline. Her heart raced. She was being used as a pawn in a game she didn't fully understand. The pressure wasn't just from the threatening words, but from the cold stares of the men surrounding her. One gripped her arm tightly, muttering that it'd be better to cooperate than to end up worse. The signature wouldn't just harm Ifeanyi, it would be her own sentence, a lie that would condemn her forever. Panic surged when she realized no one nearby would intervene. Abuja, with all its bustle, sometimes turned deaf to the suffering of those without a voice. That's how conspiracies stayed alive. Ngozi managed to break free in a moment of distraction and ran, leaving the envelope on the ground. Her heart felt like it would explode as she darted through narrow alleys, tripping over boxes and bags scattered by street vendors. The men's shouts echoed behind her, promising consequences if she was caught. Fear fueled her legs, but her body knew it couldn't keep up in this unequal race. She needed refuge, someone who would believe her before it was too late. Every corner posed the risk of an ambush. At a street food stall, she tried to hide, but soon saw the men approaching with phones in hand, likely receiving direct orders from Obiora. The pursuit wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Ifeanyi's cousin had chosen a powerful weapon, turning Ngozi's image into poison against the man who already doubted her. Signing those papers would seal both their ruins. Refusing meant being hunted like a fugitive in the capital. Out of breath, she reached the makeshift bus station where old buses departed for nearby cities. For a moment she considered, vanishing, disappearing without a trace, but she soon realized there was nowhere to run. Alone without support, it was only a matter of time before they found her again. Obiora's influence in the city was greater than she could imagine, and fighting without allies was suicide. The only way out was to seek help where she thought she had no place left, with Ifeanyi. Her mind wavered between the fear of being rejected again and the certainty that she wouldn't survive without protection. The enemy had money, men, and strategies. She had only the courage to refuse to sign a lie. That silent resistance was her last weapon, but how long could she sustain a war alone, one that had already placed her at the center of conspiracies? If you were running through Abuja's streets with enemies demanding your signature on a deadly lie, would you try to escape alone or seek help, even at the risk of rejection? Share in the comments. The return to the Maitama mansion wasn't marked by luxury but by tension. Ngozi crossed the gate with cautious steps, her heart torn between fear and hope. This time she didn't come as someone indebted to life, but as a woman who had survived pursuits, blackmail, and threats. The room, once cold as a courtroom, now felt like neutral ground where two scarred warriors met again. The initial silence was heavy, but not hostile. In their restrained breathing, there was a recognition that, alone, they'd be swallowed by the enemy. The conversation began timidly, almost suspiciously. Ifeanyi, always so reserved, finally let slip that his greatest pain wasn't the wheelchair, but the feeling that he'd never be truly loved again. Those words, spoken without theatrics, opened an unexpected breach. Ngozi realized that behind the tycoon's armor was a man who longed for something no money could buy, affection unbound by contracts or appearances. That revelation shifted the conversation's tone, turning coldness into complicity. The mansion's atmosphere also showed signs of this new phase. The classical music that once filled dinners gave way to long silences, filled with confidences. Over coffee, personal stories emerged, memories of childhood in distant villages, family losses, dreams interrupted by life's weight. In these exchanges, barriers fell little by little. The respect, once distant, turned into discreet, almost conspiratorial closeness. For the first time, they stood on the same side of the board. It was in this terrain that the plan emerged. Bringing down Obiora couldn't rely solely on technical evidence, but on emotional strategy and political savvy. Ngozi, with her experience from society's margins, suggested paths Ifeanyi would never have considered. She knew the weight of street gossip, the power of narratives in markets, and how information became undeniable truths when spoken by the right people. The tycoon listened intently, realizing he needed this perspective to win a war that was no longer just corporate. As they mapped out each step, a strange sense of partnership bloomed. They weren't just allies against a common enemy, but two souls finding meaning in each other. Trust, so hard to build in hearts marked by pain, began to take root. Each detail of the plan against Obiora wasn't just a strategic move, but a brick in building something greater, a bond that transcended their chance encounter. The mansion, once marked by suffocating silence, now echoed with hope. Ifeanyi began to smile in small doses, and Ngozi realized she hadn't returned by chance. That partnership felt like fate, and the fight against the external enemy seemed only the start of an inner transformation neither dared name aloud. But deep down, they both knew. The war against Obiora would also be the ultimate test of their newfound trust. If you were Ngozi, would you risk trusting a man who once rejected you to face a common enemy? Comment, would you join forces or run? The Daramola Holdings boardroom was packed. Men in suits whispered among themselves. Journalists waited outside, and the atmosphere reeked of judgment. At the center, Obiora took the floor with the confidence of someone who believed he had already won. With a black folder in hand, he presented seemingly irrefutable evidence. Suspicious financial transactions, manipulated contract records, and even medical reports suggesting Ifeanyi was mentally unfit to lead the company. The impact was immediate. Murmurs spread through the room, and some shareholders began nodding in disapproval. Each of Obiora's words was calculated to sound like truth. He presented paid witnesses, doctored spreadsheets, and even manipulated photos, painting his cousin as an incapacitated and dangerous leader. The performance was nearly theatrical. The board, pressured by the prospect of losing international investments, began leaning toward the fabricated narrative. It was the moment Obiora had been preparing for years, and the confidence in his smile showed. He believed victory was within reach, but the silence was broken by an unexpected voice. Ngozi entered the room, accompanied by two former company security guards who had been sacked after the accident. The room froze in shock. She carried a recorder and a folder of documents that weren't in Obiora's script. The board stirred, eyes turned to her, and tension crackled like a spark in gunpowder. If there was anything more dangerous than false evidence, it was true evidence at the right moment. With steady hands, she placed the recorder on the table and pressed play. Obiora's voice echoed through the speaker, in recorded conversations where he admitted to manipulating suppliers, buying silences, and even celebrating the sabotage of Ifeanyi's car. The impact was devastating. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the nervous breathing of shareholders. Then, the former guards' testimonies confirmed the plot. Direct orders to falsify reports, threats against those who dared, question, and cash payments to cover tracks. Obiora's expression changed in seconds. His confident smile vanished, replaced by desperation. He tried to argue, but each word felt futile against evidence that could no longer be denied. The board, once inclined to believe him, turned against him like a tide receding suddenly. The authority he flaunted slipped through his fingers, and the meeting's security guards approached to detain him. The sound of handcuffs echoed like a gavel of justice, drawing stunned gazes from everyone present. For Ifeanyi, that moment wasn't just a victory against an enemy. It was the liberation from years of pain, doubt, and humiliation. Ngozi, once seen as a threat, had become the key to the truth. She had exposed what many feared to say aloud, restoring not only the tycoon's honor, but also the company's balance. The room, once filled with suspicion, now bowed to the strength of undeniable evidence, and for the first time in a long while, Ifeanyi's gaze met hers without barriers. If you were in that room and heard the recording that unmasked Obiora, what would be your immediate reaction? Stand and applaud or stay in shocked silence? Comment now. The newborn's cry pierced the silence of the Abuja dawn like an unexpected melody. Ngozi, exhausted after hours of labor, looked at the tiny body wrapped in white cloth with tears of relief. It wasn't just a child. It was living proof that her sacrifice hadn't been in vain. In her arms, the girl breathed strongly, a sign that life was just beginning. The simple hospital room seemed lit by something greater than any luxury. It was the start of a new chapter. When the nurse placed the girl in Ifeanyi's arms, the tycoon couldn't hold back his tears. For years he had convinced himself he was doomed to loneliness. that the wheelchair was a sentence that would keep any dream of family at bay. Yet there he was, feeling his daughter's warmth against his chest, as if fate had finally decided to give something back. His stern face melted into tears, each drop washing away a piece of the accumulated pain. The fragility of that moment made him more human than any corporate power ever could. The following days were marked by simplicity and intimacy. Ngozi, still recovering, shared sleepless nights with Ifeanyi, taking turns cradling the little one. There were no staff, no luxury protocols, just two parents discovering together the chaotic routine of sleepless nights and unexpected laughter. For a man used to million-dollar meetings, trading ties for baby bottles felt almost surreal, but deep down it was there that he found meaning, far from the spotlight and power struggles. The wedding ceremony took place weeks later, quietly, in the mansion's garden. Close friends, few guests, and the striking presence of Ngozi's mother, recovered and smiling after her surgery. The scene moved everyone. A woman who nearly lost her life now witnessed her daughter start her own family. There was no ostentation, just simple flowers, soft songs, and the certainty that love could bloom even in unlikely soil. Each glance exchanged between the couple carried the memory of battles won. Curiously, the discreet union had a greater impact than any lavish party could. For many, it was proof that true wealth wasn't in expensive rings or golden invitations, but in sincere embraces and meaningful presences. Abuja, a city of contrasts, now talked not about the tycoon's fortune, but about his change in demeanor, a man who found meaning beyond business. The transformation inspired even those who only heard fragments of the story. At the end of the night, Ifeanyi held Ngozi's hand while their daughter slept in her grandmother's lap. The silence was no longer heavy or suffocating. Now it was restful, peaceful. He understood that life hadn't taken everything from him, but had led him here to find what truly mattered. The millionaire who believed he had lost the capacity to be loved discovered, at last, that it was still possible to begin again, and that true power lay in the love that binds, heals, and gives meaning. Some stories aren't about scandals, but about quiet rebirths. Ngozi didn't return to the mansion to relive wounds. She returned to turn pain into hope. Because when truth withstands lies, even the hardest heart finds redemption. And when a man who thought he'd lost everything discovers he can still be loved, the whole world understands that love is the greatest fortune. New stories are coming. Click the video below and dive into the next emotion. Until then.